Before delving into the hidden corners of the past, a quick note. The story you are about to hear is a work of historical fiction. It is woven from real Civil War tactics, aiming to highlight the quiet courage of individuals forgotten by history. What do you see? A harmless family artifact, a 19th century masterpiece. Experts thought so too. But beneath these glossy layers of oil lies a national secret sealed away for nearly 150 years. A truth so volatile someone tried to erase it from history. Today, we aren't just looking at art. We are decoding a hidden verdict. Before we examine how science illuminates the shadows of the past, a crucial note. This journey is a work of historical fiction. It is woven from real tactics and real endurance to honor the quiet resilience of countless souls overlooked by time. This is a story of what happens when truth confronts a staged oblivion. May 2024. The Smithsonian Institution, Washington, D.C. Dr. Amanda Chen, a sorceress of art conservation, is performing a familiar ritual analyzing post-Civil War American portraits. But this 1879 piece, a gift from the prominent Whitfield family of Charleston, stopped her cold. On the surface, it's a portrait of harmony. Two women, approximately in their late teens, sitting shoulder to shoulder, smiles genuine. In 1879, this level of intimacy and perceived equality between races in art was exceedingly rare, almost taboo. A plaque reads, Margaret and Clara, 1879. The donor note clarifies, found in our grandmother's attic, hidden for decades. The word hidden echoed like a warning in Amanda's mind. Why hide? A beautiful image of unity. She decided to invoke an omniscient eye X-ray conservation technology. As the paint layers became translucent under the X-ray, the laboratory atmosphere frozen. Amanda held her breath. There, buried deep beneath the veneer of a fake smile, was a brutal reality. Shapes around the wrists, shapes around the ankles. They were heavy, unmistakable. Someone had deliberately painted over iron cuffs, the very symbols of humanity's darkest form of bondage. This was not a portrait of equality. It was a portrait of possession insidiously camouflaged by layers of paint over the truth. Amanda's heart pounded. She was staring at evidence of a planned historical erasure. The question exploded. Why paint the chains only to expend so much effort concealing them? What was the true nature of their relationship? Amanda knew she could not proceed alone. She called Dr. Evelyn Washington, a leading scholar of artifacts from the era of bondage. Evelyn, I found something extraordinary. An image of two friends, but the X-rays reveal chains hidden deep within. Evelyn arrived 2 days later, bringing the shadow of the Whitfield family with her. They were once a powerful planter dynasty, controlling over 200 souls. Evelyn flipped through the files, her voice darkening. Margaret Whitfield was born in 1860. As for Clara, that name does not exist in official records, but I found this asset ledger from 1860, female infant Clara, born March 1860, assigned to domestic duties. Amanda's chest tightened. Same birth year, on the same soil. One a daughter of privilege, one categorized as property. They grew up together, played together, but were separated by a chasm of destiny. By 1879, though the laws had changed, real Shackles persisted in the form of invisible codes. This painting doesn't just tell a story of friendship, it is a battle for identity, a reminder that history can be hidden, but the truth, like the iron cuffs beneath that paint, always waits for a light strong enough to reveal it. By 1879, while physical bondage had legally vanished, invisible ligatures remained silent beneath the vibrant strokes of oil. Dr. Evelyn Washington asserted that they needed to dissect the facade of 1879 to understand why such a symbolic portrait was commissioned. For a week, they traced the fragments of Margaret's life, which appeared clearly through wedding announcements, and her long life until 1943. In contrast, Clara remained a ghost in the archives, leaving only faint traces in city directories as a domestic worker before dissolving entirely after 1885. The breakthrough came when Amanda discovered a testament of friendship tucked away in a crevice of the antique frame. A letter dated June 1879 revealed Margaret's defiant words to Clara. "I know this is taboo. My parents will be furious, but my heart knows the opposite." These two young women had secretly commissioned the piece as a desperate attempt to freeze their bond before social prejudices tore them apart forever. Yet the most haunting question remained: why was Clara portrayed in the imagery of a captive? The answer lay within the cryptic TWW1879 signature etched onto a tree in the painting. Evelyn traced this mark to King Street in Charleston, where Thomas Wright, a biracial artist, once operated his studio. As a free man of color living in a volatile era, Wright did not merely paint what the eye saw. He painted what the soul perceived. He understood that even as Margaret and Clara sat side by side as friends, the societal reality was still strangling Clara with harsh economic and legal restraints. Wright transformed a commemorative portrait into a manifesto in pigment. He deliberately rendered the iron cuffs to expose the raw truth behind the tranquil scenery. Immediately after completing the work, Wright fled Charleston for Philadelphia, an exodus triggered by his audacity to depict a forbidden truth. The portrait was no longer a memento. It was living evidence of a tragedy the Whitfield family tried to erase from their lineage by burying it under the dust of an attic for over a century. Now, 145 years after it was shrouded in silence, the cracks of that tragedy are finally being exposed to modern light. Dr. Evelyn Washington knew that to truly decode the painting, she had to find Clara's voice, the letters or diaries that could speak back to the cold layers of oil. This quest led her to the Avery Research Center in Charleston, where Marcus, an archival expert, unearthed a historical treasure, a collection of correspondence from formerly enslaved women donated by a black church in the 1930s. Among them, Clara's letters from 1877 to 1880 emerged like fragile fragments of a soul. Her careful script on cheap, coarse paper served as the only testament to her existence. One letter to Margaret in May 1879 read, "I do not know if this is wise. Your parents will be incensed if they discover we are still meeting in secret." Clara had agreed to sit beside her childhood friend one last time, hoping the portrait would serve as the sole proof that their bond was real, even as the world outside sought to deny it. The truth grew even darker in a letter from July 1879, written shortly after the portrait's completion. "Dear Margaret, I cannot see you again. Your father has discovered our secret." The trembling lines revealed a brutal reality. Margaret's father had used his influence to threaten and corner Clara. He vowed to have her imprisoned or worse if she ever dared to surface again. "The world will not allow it," Clara wrote in despair. She realized that their pure friendship was a perceived threat to the era's social order. To protect them both, Clara chose to vanish into thin air, leaving a permanent void in the Whitfield family history. The portrait hidden in the attic was not just concealing a forbidden bond, it was burying the transgression of a father who used fear to sever the connection between two kindred spirits. "Remember me with kindness." Clara's plea left Evelyn with a sickening sense of grief. Richard Whitfield hadn't just threatened Clara, he had attempted to execute a social assassination, severing her from his daughter's life forever. A final, undated letter written in a trembling hand served as a delayed testament. "My name is Clara. I was born into bondage at the Whitfield plantation in 1860. I write this so that someone may know I once existed." Clara's narrative exposed a brutal paradox. Freedom is not truly freedom when one remains shackled by the ligatures of poverty and systemic prejudice. Margaret had tried to preserve their bond through the portrait, but her father transformed that dream into a living nightmare. Evelyn and Amanda sat in stunned silence. The iron cuffs Wright had hidden beneath the pigments were not merely symbols of the past, they were the embodiment of Jim Crow laws and the suffocating power of men like Richard Whitfield. The final piece of the puzzle lay within the South Carolina Historical Society. A letter Richard wrote to his wife in July 1879, seethed with aristocratic rage, Margaret commissioned an abominable work, implying our daughter is equal to a former slave. This deep-seated bigotry forced Margaret to retreat. Hiding the portrait in the shadows of the attic, she could not display it to the world, yet she could not bear to destroy the only fragment of Clara she had left. The saga of the 1879 portrait is more than an archival discovery. It is a lesson in the resilience of human connection against the erosion of prejudice. Truth may be suppressed for a century and a half, but it is never truly erased. If this journey to reclaim historical justice moved you, please leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel to join us as we decode the next mysteries sleeping beneath the dust of time. The final truth lay not in dry administrative records, but in the tear-stained diary of Catherine Whitfield from August 1879. Richard demanded I destroy the portrait. He called it a disgrace. Yet that mother, despite benefiting from bondage her entire life, could not bring herself to do it. She had watched two children grow up together, innocent of the abysses created by adults. Catherine chose a silent rebellion. She hid the painting in the darkness of the attic, hoping that one day, when the bitterness faded, the world would understand its true value. Margaret's life after Clara's disappearance became a long sequence of melancholic days. She married a man of her father's choosing in 1881, living an exemplary life, while her soul remained shuttered. In a 1965 memoir, her granddaughter spoke of a perpetually locked drawer where Margaret kept Clara's letters and a small miniature portrait like a lifelong treasure. Upon her death, the family burned those mementos, deeming them inappropriate, never realizing the grand original was still waiting silently in the attic. As Amanda and Evelyn stood before the canvas, they saw more than just pigments and brush strokes. They saw a strangled friendship, a love rejected by society, and the invisible shackles that still leave scars today. The portrait is not merely art. It is a captive spirit that found its way home to tell its own story. Its survival is the ultimate proof that while prejudice can sever human ties, it can never truly extinguish the truth. The saga of two souls severed by the wall of prejudice now unveils a new chapter: Clara's clandestine escape. After 1879, the name Clara completely evaporated from every administrative record in Charleston. This was no coincidence, but a deliberate erasure of her tracks to preserve her life against the lethal threats of Richard Whitfield. Dr. Evelyn was forced to launch a multi-state manhunt, connecting with genealogical experts to find a flicker of light within the dusty archives of the American South. After weeks of scouring, a pivotal lead surfaced in Augusta, Georgia. The 1880 census recorded a black woman named Clara, aged 20, a perfect age match for Margaret's lost friend. Augusta, a distance just far enough from Charleston to start over, had become the sanctuary for a fugitive. In the archives of the Springfield Baptist Church, Evelyn found the key to the mystery Clara's membership record from 1879, containing a haunting testimony on why she fled her home. "I left to escape a situation that had become perilous." In this new land, Clara was no longer property or a name pushed to the margins of society. She built her own life as a laundress, residing in a boarding house for independent women and dedicating herself to mutual aid societies to assist those sharing her past burdens. Through 6 years of persistent labor and faith, Clara slowly healed the scars of her history. Finally, in 1885, a more radiant page was turned when her name appeared in a profoundly significant document, a marriage license. Hope finally took root in Dr. Evelyn's heart when she discovered Samuel, a carpenter in Augusta, who helped Clara build a sanctuary from the fragments of her past. Through the 1890 and 1900 census records, the image of a thriving family with 4 children gradually emerged. Clara was no longer a historical phantom. She was a wife, a mother, and a resilient working woman. However, that life was cut short at the age of 43. A brief 1903 obituary in the Augusta Chronicle noted her passing from pneumonia, praising a soul of quiet dignity and kindness, yet remaining utterly silent about her turbulent years in Charleston. It wasn't until Samuel's 1804 letter to the church surfaced that the connection was truly mended. Samuel wrote, "My wife rarely spoke of Charleston, but before she passed, she told me of Margaret, who showed her kindness when kindness was rare." Clara had carried the ache of their separation and those letters as sacred relics until her final breath. Samuel preserved them in her stead, allowing Evelyn to find them a century later at the Avery Center. 2 women in 2 different worlds had spent their entire lives secretly mourning a bond the world refused to acknowledge. Back in Washington, Amanda continued to pierce through the canvas, using infrared reflectography, now guided by a newfound empathy. Beneath the layers of pigment, the secrets of the artist Wright became chillingly clear. The iron cuffs around Clara's wrists were not merely symbolic abstractions. They were rendered with extraordinary detail, capturing the exact weight and mechanics of real restraints. It was clear that Wright had faced the brutality of actual shackles firsthand. But just then, Amanda's sensors detected something else, something even more jarring than the chains. Beneath the layers of aging pigment nestled within the deep shadows of the painted garden, Amanda reached the ultimate stratum of truth. As the contrast was pushed to its limit, faint letters emerged like a coded message from the past 1879. Wright had etched this date into the very grain of the canvas, a message meant to be invisible yet eternally present. Even more jarring, the infrared scans stripped away the facade of Clara's expression. She had not been smiling. Wright initially captured the tears pooling in the corners of her eyes before being forced to overwrite them with a layer of artificial happiness so the painting could survive. With a mixture of reverence and grief, Amanda explained to Evelyn Wright painted the truth first. A Clara in shackles weeping beside Margaret. Only then did he create the version the world was permitted to see. It was a profound act of silent resistance through art. Wright fulfilled the friend's request without ever betraying the brutal reality. This gifted artist's journey eventually concluded in Philadelphia in 1891, where he was remembered for capturing the dignity of souls who had escaped bondage but had yet to find true liberation. Wright's legacy is not merely a collection of portraits. They are historical black boxes waiting to be decoded. Amanda and Evelyn knew this discovery would shatter the foundations of art history, but they felt a more sacred mission, finding Clara's descendants. If her lineage continued through those 4 children in Augusta, then this truth belonged to them. After 3 months of piecing together genealogical fragments, a phone call from Georgia changed everything. We've found them. Clara's great granddaughter. Her name is Michelle. Michelle, a history teacher in Atlanta, possesses eyes with a haunting gentleness, the very eyes of Clara from 145 years ago. As Evelyn and Amanda presented the X-ray films and yellowed letters, time seemed to stand still. Michelle gazed in stunned silence at the image of her ancestor shackled beneath the paint. This is my great-great-grandmother. We knew she fled Charleston in haste, but we never understood why. Tears fell as she realized the sorrow Clara carried for 43 years was not just from oppression, but from mourning a friendship strangled by hatred. Michelle's very existence is a testament to Clara's extraordinary strength, a woman brave enough to rebuild from the ashes in Augusta. But the story did not end there. Michelle was resolute about meeting Margaret's descendants. I want them to know that Clara never forgot. That friendship was real, and it was more significant than anything the world tried to impose on them. A fateful meeting was arranged at the Smithsonian Institution, where the portrait awaited its public debut. David Whitfield arrived tall with blonde hair echoing Margaret's in the painting, his face etched with the discomfort of a man discovering a shadow in his lineage. Standing before Michelle and the portrait his family had donated decades ago, David slowed his pace, his breath heavy. For the first time in over a century, 2 bloodlines, once severed by power and bondage, stood side by side not as master and property, but as witnesses to a buried truth. The atmosphere at the Smithsonian grew heavy with tension as the 2 descendants faced their shared legacy. Michelle broke the silence with a voice that was calm, yet resolute. Your family tried to erase this story. Richard Whitfield used his power to shatter a friendship and exile my ancestor from her home. David Whitfield bowed his head, the weight of his lineage heavy upon him, I know. Dr. Washington shared the documents. I am ashamed of what my forefathers did. But Michelle was not seeking superficial apologies. She reminded David that while Margaret lived in luxury, keeping the letters as a somber memento, Clara paid with everything her friends, her home, and her childhood forced to start over with nothing. Dr. Evelyn gently intervened, pointing out that both women were victims of a brutal system where equality was treated as a crime. The true villain was not just an individual, but the specter of systemic racism that made their bond impossible. In an attempt to mend the historical wound, David proposed, establishing a scholarship in Clara's name and funding the exhibition. However, Michelle rejected any notion of charity. She insisted that what Clara sought was not alms, but dignity and justice. Her story must be told in full. Michelle declared no omissions, no sugarcoating from the hidden shackles to the cruel threats. David agreed. An unlikely alliance formed as they gathered fragments from Catherine's diaries and the Whitfield archives to reconstruct a truth that refused to be silenced. Deep within the shadows of the painted garden, Amanda reached the ultimate stratum of truth. As the contrast was pushed to its limit, faint letters emerged, like a coded message from the past 1879. The artist Wright had etched this date into the very grain of the canvas, a message meant to be invisible, yet eternally present. Even more jarring, the infrared scans stripped away the facade of Clara's expression. She had not been smiling. Wright initially captured the tears, pooling in the corners of her eyes, before being forced to overwrite them with a layer of artificial happiness so the painting could survive. With a mixture of reverence and grief, Amanda explained to Evelyn Wright painted the truth first. A Clara in shackles weeping beside Margaret. Only then did he create the version the world was permitted to see. It was a profound act of silent resistance through art. Wright fulfilled the friend's request without ever betraying the brutal reality. This gifted artist's journey eventually concluded in Philadelphia in 1891, where he was remembered for capturing the dignity of souls who had escaped bondage but had yet to find true liberation. In 2025, the exhibition titled Hidden Bonds opened at the Smithsonian Institution. The portrait sat at the center, flanked by X-ray films exposing the hidden shackles and erased tears. Michelle Clara's great-great-great-granddaughter and David Whitfield, Margaret's great-grandson, stood before the canvas together. David bowed his head, acknowledging his family's dark past, while Michelle affirmed her ancestors' dignity. Together, they committed to telling Clara's full story without omission, as a healing tribute to a wound that had lasted over a century. In 1879, two young women who grew up together on a South Carolina plantation secretly commissioned this portrait to preserve their childhood friendship. One was Margaret Whitfield, the planter's daughter. The other was Clara, formerly enslaved. Both were 19 years old, 14 years after the legal end of slavery. They hoped this painting would prove their bond was real, even as society insisted they remain segregated and unequal. The artist Thomas Wright, a free man of color, captured a profound truth. He first portrayed Clara in shackles with tears streaming down her face, exposing the reality that legal freedom had not ended her ties to poverty, racism, and harsh social restrictions. Thomas Wright then painted over those painful details to create the peaceful scene the two women could keep. Yet beneath the paint, the truth remained permanently, undeniably present, waiting 145 years to be brought to light. This section displays Clara's life after her forced departure from Charleston. Visitors see records of her marriage to Samuel, images of her 4 children, and her dignified working life in Augusta. The centerpiece is Samuel's 1804 letter to the church, a sacred relic preserving the memory of Clara's kindness and her lingering longing for her old friend. This display contrasts Clara's freedom by showing Margaret's life within the confines of high society. At the heart of this area is a replica of the desk with the locked drawer, where Margaret kept Clara's letters her entire life. Beside it is her granddaughter's regretful account of how the family burned those letters after Margaret's death, an act that nearly erased Clara's existence from the family history forever. The exhibition also features the story of Thomas Wright, the artist who used his brush as a weapon of resistance. His other portraits, his flight to Philadelphia and his quiet passing in 1891, are vividly chronicled. Infrared analyses of Thomas Wright's other works suggest they too may harbor geological layers of truth buried beneath the oil surface. However, the most powerful moment is found in the final room. Here, large-scale photographs show Michelle and David standing together before the portrait. Their own stories as 21st-century descendants are displayed alongside those of their ancestors. Michelle authored a proud statement. "My great-great-grandmother Clara survived bondage, survived a brutal separation, and survived insidious threats. She planted the seeds of life in Augusta and passed down a legacy of resilience. I teach history because Clara believed in the power of education and truth." This painting was nearly hidden forever, much like countless stories of Black women erased from the timeline. But Clara triumphed. Her voice lives on in the letters in the hidden pigments and in the memories transmitted through generations. In response, David wrote a sincere admission. "My great-grandmother Margaret tried to preserve a friendship the world rejected. She failed against her father's cruelty and the decay of racism. But today we stand here to fulfill their unfinished hope." Margaret never stopped caring, even as she remained trapped between privilege and remorse. She kept Clara's letters in a locked drawer for 60 years, a silence that was both complicit and agonizing. Her story reminds us that systemic prejudice harms everyone, even those who benefit from it, by stripping away the capacity for sincere connection. David affirmed, "I cannot change what Richard did, but I can honor what Margaret tried to preserve and what Clara overcame." The exhibition at the Smithsonian became a cultural phenomenon, sparking profound discussions on the post-slavery era and the complex bonds between women in the American South. 6 months after the opening, a miracle occurred. Michelle received a package from Charleston. It was a letter from Patricia, a 92-year-old woman. "Dear Michelle, I am Clara's youngest daughter. I am still alive. I saw the news, and I wanted you to know that I still remember my mother." Patricia shared a fragile yet priceless memory from when she was 3 years old. Clara had shown her a small hidden sketch of 2 young women sitting side by side. Clara told her daughter, "This is my friend Margaret. The world said we couldn't be friends, but we were. Remember that." Clara's final message serves as the ultimate summary of this journey. The world is often wrong about who is worthy of love, but the truth of the heart never misses a beat. Inside the package from Patricia lay a treasure preserved for 89 years. A small pencil sketch on aged, yellowed paper. Michelle's hands trembled as she unwrapped it, revealing 2 young girls barely 7 or 8 years old, holding hands and smiling. At the bottom in a child's scrawl it read, "Margaret and Clara, 1867. This was the purest testament drawn 12 years before the official portrait, back when their souls were still innocent and uncrushed by the weight of systemic racism. The sketch and Patricia's letter were immediately added to the exhibition, serving as the final piece of the historical puzzle. When Michelle visited Patricia in Charleston, the reunion of generations moved everyone to tears. Patricia wept seeing photos of 4 generations of successful, educated descendants, the living legacy of Clara's resilience. "Mother would be so proud," Patricia whispered. "She always taught us that education is the key to ensuring no one ever makes us feel small." The final truth was revealed. It was Margaret, who had secretly taught Clara to read when they were children, despite the dire risks of punishment. This was why Clara valued knowledge so deeply and dedicated her life to its pursuit. Their legacy is not just a portrait hiding shackles. It is a flame of intellect and love that has burned through 2 centuries, reminding us that the world may divide people with laws, but it can never sever hearts that have chosen to understand one another. The exhibition at the Smithsonian was no longer just an art event. It became a global educational phenomenon. Due to overwhelming demand, it was extended for another year, welcoming thousands of students to learn about the legacy of bondage and the power of human connection. The story of Margaret and Clara is now the most vivid lesson on how humanity can transcend the artificial barriers of racial prejudice. Michelle and David transformed their initial collaboration into a sincere friendship, a bond built on honoring their ancestors. Together they appeared at international conferences, authored poignant articles, and tirelessly advocated for teaching difficult history with radical honesty. 5 years after the opening, Michelle officially published her book, Hidden Chains, My Great-Grandmother's Story and the Friendship That Survived in Paint. The book is a delicate blend of Clara's letters, Wright's artistic history, and Michelle's personal reflections. In the final chapter, she wrote, "I teach my students that history is not just about dates and events. It is about people, love, loss, and survival. Margaret and Clara loved each other from childhood long before the world taught them they shouldn't. They tried to preserve that love through a portrait, but the weight of prejudice proved stronger at the time. Clara lost her friend, her home, and everything familiar. Yet she did not allow that loss to consume her. Instead, she built a new life from the ashes, raising her children and passing down values that reached me 5 generations later. The shackles painted by Thomas Wright are more than just historical artifacts. They represent the chains that still persist in various subtle forms within modern society. But Clara's resilience, her refusal to be defined solely by the tragedies she endured, is what truly lives on. It lives in Michelle, in her students, and in everyone who chooses to confront history rather than forget it. The portrait remains prominently displayed at the Smithsonian, with the X-ray images permanently alongside it, a timeless reminder that the truth always finds a way to the light. Visitors from across the globe arrived to witness a marvel not just of art, but of history. They came to see a friendship captured on the surface, the shackles buried beneath, and the truth that Thomas Wright had silently preserved for 145 years. In Atlanta, Michelle cherished Patricia's childhood sketch, placing it in her school office. She showed her students the image of 2 little girls holding hands and drawing long before they knew the world would try everything to tear them apart. "But look," she told her students, pointing first to the sketch and then to the official portrait. They fought tenaciously to stay connected. Margaret commissioned that painting. Clara kept those letters like sacred relics. And Thomas Wright used his brush to etch the truth hidden beneath. And now, after all these years, we know their story. We know they mattered. We know their friendship was real. The shackles were hidden. She continued, her eyes burning with conviction. But so was the resistance. So was the love. So was the truth. And truth has a way of surviving. Even when buried under layers of paint, even when hidden in an attic, even when those in power try to erase it, the truth persists. And so do we. The journey to decode the portrait hidden bonds officially comes to an end, leaving us with a timeless lesson. No layer of paint is thick enough to bury the truth, and no shackles are strong enough to imprison the human heart. Do you believe that the truth always triumphs? Over time, share your thoughts in the comments below. Make sure to hit the like button to honor the resilience of Clara and Margaret, and subscribe to join us as we uncover the next world-shaking secrets of history. Thank you for staying with us until the very end together. Let's ensure that the truth is always heard.